I would like to thank Oxford University for providing a travel grant to enable me to attend this conference, and I would like to thank the audience for their questions and comments. So the issue I'm addressing is the fact that computer scientists are proposing technological solutions to tackle bias. And as you know, we as human beings have both conscious and unconscious bias. Unconscious bias means that we have assumptions which influence our perception and decision making, and these assumptions are beyond our awareness. Studies in countries such as Canada and the United States show that applicants who have ethnic names on average receive fewer offers to attend an interview than applicants with standard names with the same skill set and the same education and so on. And computer scientists such as Joanna Bryson argue that the use of artificial intelligence systems will make it possible to make better decisions. In terms of what artificial intelligence is, we still don't have a definition of what constitutes artificial intelligence, and our understanding of this concept is evolving. Roughly speaking, there is consensus that artificial intelligence involves a set of programming techniques where the system has a model of the environment and it updates the model continuously based on the information that it receives through its sensors from the outside environment. And for the purpose of my presentation, I would like to define what constitutes an artificial decision-making process. And the reason for why we need the definition stems from the fact that computer scientists argue that artificial intelligence systems will be great in predicting the future performance of candidates who apply, for example, to be admitted to university or who want to be employed at a particular organization. And then computer scientists argue that to achieve fairness, the system would then add points if the applicant has protected characteristics. So by protected characteristics, they mean characteristics which are protected by by legislation prohibiting discrimination. So these would include gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religious beliefs, health status, and so on. And the definition which I would like to use to define an artificial intelligence decision-making process comes from a report by the Council of Europe. It came out this summer, and it defines this process as starting where the computer scientists collect information and attach labels to it to make information meaningful to a computer system. So, for example, a computer system would associate a chair, the image of the object chair, to the word chair. The decision-making process includes computer scientists building a model representing the environment. This system grouping individuals into groups based on perceived similarity. The system making projections about the future performance of the candidate, for example, on an examination or in excelling as an employee, and then in applying a decision-making process. So the decision-making process can take many forms. It can either use for example, the past grades on examinations or standardized tests as input, or it can incorporate additional criteria, for example, as I mentioned before, taking into account protected characteristics and adding additional points to each candidate. Now, there are many issues with artificial intelligence decision-making processes, and in my presentations I want to concentrate on a very narrow aspect, which is how these systems undermine human diversity, and how in doing so the operation of artificial intelligence decision-making processes impairs the attainment of social justice. And so To start with, we need to understand how artificial intelligence decision-making processes work. And I will give you a very crude snapshot. So essentially, an individual is represented in the system as a vector. And a vector is a mathematical equation. And the kind of data that can be mapped on a vector has to be expressed in quantitative form. And Sorel Friedler and her colleagues point out that any qualitative information such as, for example, intelligence, will have to be converted to a quantitative format using a proxy. So the grade on a test, for example, is a proxy for what we are talking when we are talking about intelligence. And there have been many scholars who have been critical of this type of representation. For example, we have Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein, who point out that historically society constructed human difference through categories such as gender or race or a host of other characteristics. And so what happens when you map a person using these kinds of criteria is that you are reproducing historical injustices. And they have written about the importance of bringing back human bodies and of contextualizing the data. And Femke's noting also has a similar discussion, and we have a lot of scholarship, for example, by Judith Butler preceding this type of scholarship, which talks about how society constructs gender, and that there is nothing natural about talking about gender differences. And I would like to take this scholarship and to build on it further. And in order to do so, I look at the scholarship of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt has written about the importance of pluralism. So for her, we can have a web of human relationships and a reality only if we have pluralism. So we need to have different points of view and different value systems. And she draws a contrast between pluralism and totalitarian states. And she points out that in totalitarian states, the communication is very monochrome, and that it takes place, is done in a particular way so as to exclude pluralism. And for me, my understanding of the taking of the ideas of Hannah Arendt to the context of artificial intelligence is that diversity and pluralism relates to individuals being able to define who they are and to link the experiences that they had in their life to explain their identity, their vision of the world, and what they contribute to organizations and society. And as Veronica Vasteling points out, every individual is unique precisely because of the unique set of experiences that every person has. And so when we come to the artificial intelligence system, when we map an individual as a vector, as a set of numbers, that creates a space where individuals cannot communicate their plurality, their diversity, their experiences, because they are forced to put this information in a particular format. And I would like to connect this now to real life examples of how when we force individuals to express themselves in a particular way, we are creating social injustice. So in terms of the social injustice stemming from creating certain structures, we as society have done this for a very long time. So to give you an example of Canada, in Canada, law schools look for candidates who not only have good grades, but who additionally have very interesting extracurricular experiences and have done very good, have made an extensive contribution to their communities. And so usually when they sift through applications, they pick out candidates who, for example, volunteered in Africa or who established their own NGOs. And the lecturers don't always realize that the choice of these admissions criteria excludes many candidates, in particular those who don't have the financial means to travel to Africa and to volunteer there for an extended period of time. Many of them cannot even volunteer in Canada because they, for example, they work alongside studying, and so they have very valuable experiences, but it's very difficult for them to communicate them according to the template which the law schools created to communicate their skills and contributions. And they find that there is not much alternative space where they can tell their story. And again, the storytelling aspect is Hannah Arendt discusses in extensive detail. And she makes a very interesting observation about science, that science creates concepts for making sense of the world, but you really need context or human experiences to make sense of these concepts. And so what happens in the Canadian admissions process is that there is a template or a concept of a good candidate which decontextualizes the lived experiences of the individuals. And now I would like to move to the next stage and discuss the stage in the decision-making process where computer scientists argue that they produce fair outcomes because they give points to candidates who come, who have certain protected characteristics. And one of the examples is the IBM fairness tool, which the company unrolled about 6 months ago. And I would argue that it's very problematic to argue that you can achieve fairness just by attaching points. To contextualize this discussion, I would like to refer to the scholarship of Kimberly Crenshaw, who developed the concept of intersectionality. So she argues that an individual cannot be understood just by accumulating the characteristics of the individual. So you cannot understand someone's experiences just by saying, well, this person is a person of color, and then adding, for example, well, this person is also LGBTQ. So you cannot just stack and add up protected characteristics to understand the experiences of these individuals and how they experience social barriers. And I would extend the idea of intersectionality to the context of the artificial intelligence decision-making processes to argue that you cannot just attach a number on someone's lived experience without being arbitrary, and that you cannot capture people's experiences by just adding together numbers. So to give you an example, Martha Feynman has a very interesting theory called the vulnerability theory, and she theorizes unequal social relationships. And she argues that actually we need access to many resources which are crucial to our human flourishing. And these, for example, include access to educational opportunities, access to social opportunities where we can build networks, access to aesthetic opportunities such as art, culture, or religion to enable us to realize themselves, access to ecological resources such as environment, and so on. And when you have an artificial decision-making process that just adds points, it doesn't reflect the fact that you can have one racialized person, for example, who have access to a mentor, but you may have many people who don't have access to a mentor, and because of this, they because they don't have access to information about what steps they can take to improve their chances of success, they are much more disadvantaged. And the artificial decision-making process, it's a very crude system because it doesn't capture very key information that determines to what extent an individual is located in unequal relationships with other individuals and the institution. For example, in the admissions decision-making process, it will be very difficult for the decision-making tool to have access to information such as the extent to which an individual had access to a mentoring network, or to information about how admissions officers reach decisions. It will be difficult to also incorporate information about what kind of resources a person has access to outside of their schooling. So in the context of the United Kingdom, for example, the Sutton Trust found that 25% of children have access to private tutors to prepare them for admission to university. And this creates a disparity of access to education, because children who don't have access to private tutoring are at a disadvantage compared to their counterparts. It's also the case that some children can receive more help from their older siblings, or from their parents, or from their network, so to speak. And then there are other children who don't have these opportunities. And so when we talk about equality, again, I want to refer to the argument of Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein. It's important to do what they call bringing back the bodies and contextualize the information. And by this, they mean that we need to involve the affected communities. But I would argue that it's not enough to just involve the affected communities in building these systems. Rather, what we need is to try to expand our understanding of how social difference is constructed, how unequal relationships are constructed, why and how we come to have unequal relationships with institutions, and so on. And from my perspective, when you are using mathematics as a tool, it doesn't allow you to have this very nuanced understanding of what is happening socially. And from my perspective, the personal statement has been a useful tool where individuals had an opportunity to speak for themselves, what experiences they have had, how they can contribute, what kind of challenges they encountered in their life, how they overcame them, and how these challenges are influencing their ability to access opportunities that are crucial to them. Of course, I'm aware about the fact that we have human bias and that human decisions are far from perfect. I believe we should be spending our resources on improving ourselves and improving how we relate to each other, and reaching a point where we see ourselves as part of a shared humanity and we value each other's contribution. In terms of the technology, it could be used for particular tasks to assist us. So for example, we know that artificial intelligence is very good at finding out patterns. So we know about what kind of injustices took place in the past. For example, we can see the gender imbalance in a particular industry. But again, if we use artificial intelligence as a tool, we really need to understand how we are using it, for what purpose, why, and what its limitations are. And so far, the problematic aspects stem from mathematics and how data is constructed. So unless there is huge breakthrough in knowledge or a different way of doing data science, I think it will be very extremely difficult to overcome these types of concerns. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you.